If you have heard the words, comparison is the thief of joy, and something has always felt a little bit off about this advice, to simply not compare yourself to other people when we are part of a shared world and a shared collective experience. Or if these words have actually really resonated with you, but you're always open to a different perspective, then this soul session, this episode, in other words, is for you. Hello, soul sibling. Hello, sunshine. Hello, divine and magical being. Welcome or welcome back to the Soul Salon, a soulful place for the dreamers, for the feelers, for the healers of all kinds. I want to welcome you and say I am so grateful. This conversation is one that comes up for me very often. We've all felt the pain of comparing ourselves to other people, whether that be people whose lifestyles or beauty or relationship or career that we have felt a deep envy for, a deep unworthiness towards ourselves for. We've also compared ourselves because we're taught to put romantic love on a pedestal, all the ageist milestones that we're supposed to reach. We're taught to want to progress with our peer group. And so when we start to deviate from each other, it's like, wait, what is going on? Especially with the people who are really intimately woven in our social world. There's this sense that, okay, we were on the same path, we went to the same schools or whatever it was, and then what happened? Suddenly you're there, I'm here. Often the idea is you should be happy for your friends, and I totally think this is true in many ways, and at the same time it kind of erases some of the deeper pain that happens in this feeling of jealousy and envy and social comparison that I don't think is in any way malicious. Like if someone's friend gets engaged and they feel jealous, that doesn't make them a bad friend in my mind, unless they act on that jealousy in a malicious way. But if they can sit with that jealousy and say, wow, I'm feeling jealous of my friend for this milestone, and that this jealousy is not purely my own. This jealousy is the culture that I've grown up in. It is my conditioning. It is the fact that we are taught to think of each other as competitors rather than collaborators. This comparison and this jealousy is really a product of the environment that I've grown up in. So long as I choose to respond to it with love, not only for myself, but also for this person, and not be harmful towards them in any way, and still express love and support towards them, I think that that is not in any way, to me, something that we should be made to feel shame around.
We are taught to envy the same things that reproduce the social order. Think about it: wealth, beauty, consumption, nuclear family, social dominance, and a capitalist, white supremacist, eco-genocidal definition of success.
And I think the problem with comparison is that it's often very much experienced as deeply shameful. So it's not just the fact that we're looking around and saying, am I doing well enough? Am I beautiful enough? Am I whatever enough? It's that we also then feel shame for the fact that we don't feel good enough. And there's not a lot of collective space to hold this shame and hold this emotion together. So we're left experiencing it in isolation. It's very difficult to have conversations around the feeling of comparison. It's difficult to admit and to say even the words, to use your body and your mouth to say the words, I'm jealous of them, I'm jealous of her, I'm really feeling not good enough because of the success I see this person having. And again, that success is shaped by this capitalist and hierarchical and elitist understanding of what success even means and looks like, and indeed that it could look like something at all. So with this, I think there are very few collective opportunities that we can sit with this feeling. We turn to people online to help us sit with this emotion and help us make sense of it. And my issue is that in response, I fear that the response to this idea that we're all comparing ourselves to each other and it feels really painful is actually its own kind of individualistic logic. So comparison, I think, as a phenomenon is rooted in individualism, not on a personal level. Like, I'm not saying when you compare yourself to someone else, you're being individualistic. I think on a cultural level, it's shaped by an individualistic paradigm. When we are living more egalitarian lives that are rooted in shared resources, we share the hunt, we share the water, there's enough to go around. When we have a culture that's deeply rooted in some relationship with some sense of the divine, something bigger than us, and with nature and with each other, when that is a deep value system of the community that we are raised in, I think when we have all these factors, when we are taught to see beauty as something that we access through nature and through the divine and through collective dancing and rituals and healing practices, when that is our understanding of what beauty is, and when that is our understanding of what we are all here to co-create, I think there's just so much less room for comparison. So I fear that the response of telling people, Don't compare yourself to others. You're on your own journey. And I've said these words, and I think it's coming from a really loving place. I'm not criticizing the people who say this. I don't think that they're somehow trying to promote individualism. I understand so much that this is coming from this idea of it's easy to look around and feel I'm unworthy, but what we really should be doing is looking inwards, looking towards ourselves and thinking, what am I trying to accomplish? What do I value? What am I doing? So that I'm on my own journey. I'm on my own timeline. And at the same time that I can hold this view with love, I also think we need to ask ourselves, why the fuck am I on my own journey? Why am I on my own journey? We just take that for granted, like that's meant to be soothing. And I think it's really interesting because we've been taught to find refuge in our very isolation. Oh, don't worry about what other people are doing. Just focus on yourself. You're on your own path. But then I ask you, and if you think of the metaphor of being on a path, why are we on our own path? It's such an individualistic understanding of what we are here to do as alive and conscious and loving and intentional beings. That the purpose of all of this is for you to go off on your own. There's a lot of videos about how you should disappear for 6 months and reemerge as who you were always meant to be. You know what I mean? And it's like, why are we romanticizing how deeply isolated from each other and from a higher sense of meaning we all have been made to be? There's a beautiful quote by a philosopher who I am obsessed with named Bayo Akomolafe. He literally blows my mind. He's Nigerian. He's a contemporary philosopher that I feel so excited and thrilled by and just grateful exists.
I don't believe abandonment is possible in an entangled universe. I believe we're all connected even beyond the things that we say we believe. Lives do not turn on the cognitive perception or the cognitive convenience of believing that we are enraptured and indebted and entrained with and entangled with forces that are larger than these ideas of what you believe and what I believe.
Something that he says is sometimes the way we respond to the crisis is the crisis.
Sometimes the ways that we respond to the critical events around us only becomes a resuscitation of those problems. Then we're in a very unique place. You know, we might tell ourselves, for instance, that the thing to do now is to persist, that climate chaos is a thing. And if it's a thing, then we should do our very best to save the planet. And how do we do this? We reduce carbon emissions. How do we reduce carbon emissions? We kind of motivate ourselves to do so. And we put in a lot of money and ads and political currency in trying to educate people about the facts and also to motivate them to be good, conscientious folks. But then a broader look would invite us to notice that turning off the lights doesn't quite do as much as we think it does. Or sending your neatly discarded trash to a green emerald city where it is hopefully recycled and sent back to you as a green product doesn't quite work the way you think it does. So sustainability and those ideas, while idealized and maybe possibly laudable, actually work as waste colonialism and racialized capitalism and extractivism. So they're doing the very opposite of what they claim to be doing beneath the surface of our righteousness.
He's talking about this at a very large scale, so you can go and look at his work. What I want to talk about with respect to this conversation is by saying, I know this comparison is painful, but you're on your own journey. I think that is also a crisis. I think that is a crisis of alienation. And I want to read you a quote from Gabor Mate's work, The Myth of Normal, where he's really showing us the importance of thinking collectively, thinking communally, and the crises that emerge when we think in individualistic ways.
If you have a bunch of plants growing in a garden, and these plants were not developing the way they should, if they were start behaving or manifesting in ways that are pathological, that doesn't further their growth, that doesn't ensure that they have the longest possible lifespan, that stunts their development somehow. If you were a gardener, what would you do? Well, you'd have to ask yourself, what is the nature of these plants, and what conditions does the nature of the plant demand for healthy development? And I'm suggesting that rather than looking to diagnose diseases or conditions or behaviors, why don't we look at what is the nature of human beings and what conditions are necessary for the healthy development of human beings, and what happens when those healthy conditions are not met. So in other words, instead of seeing human behavior as sort of inherently pathological or healthy, why don't we look at it as the outcome of circumstances, just as we would the development or maldevelopment of a plant or, say, an animal? So I'm not going to go through all of evolution with you and scientific prehistory, not that I know it anyway, but I'm certainly interested in what is human nature and what conditions promote its healthy development and what conditions undermine it. And it's from the point of view of how does a culture meet the needs of human beings and how does it promote healthy or unhealthy development that we have to judge any society.
So when we think about the idea that in response to you feeling pain when you compare yourself to others, you should just not compare yourself to them, and how that burdens the individual with a societal issue. It's like a societal and cultural problem that we are now putting on the shoulders of the individual and saying, now you go cope with this. So listen to this quote from the book, The Myth of Normal by Dr. Gabor. In an atomized, materialistic culture, people are induced to take everything personally. And listen to the double meaning of that, because we tend to think of that as negative, right? Don't take that personally. It's not about you. But also, when you get sick, oh, fuck, I got sick, versus it's not your fault you got sick. It's the culture, it's the society, okay? So, in an atomized, materialistic culture, people are induced to take everything personally, to see their own mental and physical distress as misfortunes or even failures belonging to them alone. But later on he says, a society that fails to value communality, our need to belong, to care for one another, and to feel caring energy flowing toward us, is a society facing away from the essence of what it means to be human. Pathology cannot but ensue. To say so is not a moral assertion, but an objective assessment. When people start to lose a sense of meaning and get disconnected, that is where disease comes from. And remember, disease, dis-ease. That's where breakdown in our health, mental, physical, social health occurs. This is a quote from psychiatrist and neuroscientist Bruce Perry, this subquote. And then Gabor Mate continues. If a gene or virus were found that caused the same impact on the population's well-being as disconnection does, news of it would bellow from front page headlines. Because it transpires on so many levels and so pervasively, we almost take it for granted. It is the water we swim in. We are steeped in the normalized myth that we are, each of us, mere individuals striving to attain private goals. The more we define ourselves that way, the more estranged we become from vital aspects of who we are and what we need to be healthy. Whew. If it's one thing about me, I love a quote. I love a quote, okay? I think the part that gave me the most chills. We are steeped in the normalized myth that we are, each of us, mere individuals striving to attain private goals. You're on your own journey. You're on your own path. Focus on you. Now, another person's work that I want to bring in here, who I am absolutely obsessed with. I'm obsessed with each of these people that I've brought up so far. But his name is Byung Chul-Hun, and he is a Korean-born German philosopher. And I'm obsessed with his book, The Disappearance of Rituals. I can't wait to read more of his work, but it's one of those books that you really want to sit with. I've just finished it a few weeks ago, and it's something that I just want to keep rereading. It's so excellent. And he speaks about the way that our society has become so atomized, and that the disappearance of rituals means that we are basically a people who do not feel at home in space and time. And he basically says that rituals are to time what home is to space. Rituals make time habitable. We cannot live in time without shared collective rituals. He talks about the degradation of community. He talks about this hyper focus on authenticity and how we have become a more narcissistic culture, that the obsession is on producing the self, being a self, actualizing a self, and how anxieties and depression can only ensue from such a society. And it links perfectly with what Gabor is saying. If we are set up to think of ourselves as atomized individuals, we will never be well. We will never have health. We will never have peace. We will never have ease. We will always be in dis-ease. But then the culture, the society will continue to burden and blame the individual for experiencing the symptoms of the culture that they live in. And that's exactly what I believe is happening with this idea of comparison.
The following excerpt is from the podcast Philosophize This, episode 189.
What happens when you give people this message that they're a project to be optimized, that they're a commodity that needs to improve their market value by constantly learning and growing, that they are the sole person that should be determining who they are, and that if anybody ever tries to tell them who or what they should be, to not listen to that person? When you divvy out that message to people en masse, Byung Chul-Han would say it should not be surprising to you if what emerges from that is a society where people generally just consider the existence and opinions of other people less because they're focused on themselves, and are more skeptical towards community bonds that try to tell them what to do because they should decide what to do. And if these inwardly focused people are more skeptical of things that bond communities together, then one of the common things in the world this type of person is naturally going to be antagonistic towards are the very rituals and traditions that communities often participate in. Put another way, to Byung Chul-Han, a trap that's common for a narcissistic person to fall into is that they will reject social norms, mores, customs, and politeness, and they will reject these things simply on the basis of who are any of these people to tell me how I should be acting anyway.
Let me read you a couple of quotes from Byung Chul-Han's book, The Disappearance of Rituals. So he says, "The narcissism of authenticity undermines community." Okay, so that sentence in and of itself is doing so much. So when we say be your true self and actualize your true self, and I've used this language, I think it's not coming from a malicious place. Again, I think it is the culture we're breathing in, but there is critique here that I think is important. So he's saying that project of being authentic, proving you're authentic, and being valued for your authenticity, your ability to be an author of yourself and of your own life, he's saying that is inherently narcissistic. And I think this speaks to who the self belongs to and where the self is meant to be located. Are we really meant to be our truest self, listen to ourselves, listen to our intuition, understand our purpose, or are we actually here for a collectivist purpose? In which case, it doesn't really matter what our truest self is. It doesn't really matter what our inner voice is saying. What matters is the collective's well-being and the collective cohesion.
I fell into a binary way of thinking here. It's not either this or that, it's both. We are both individuals and members of a collective. However, colonialism plus capitalism have atomized society into an individualistic understanding and experience of reality, particularly in the West. And because Western cultural imperialism involves the mass export of consumerist and capitalist culture plus values, individualism is becoming an increasingly global ideology. We can observe this by the fact of rising inequality globally, even in those same nations with collectivist cultures.
The narcissism of authenticity undermines community. So what he's saying is, in a society where you privilege authenticity, you will undermine community. I love the chapter that this is from, which I think is called The Cult of Authenticity or something like that. The cult of authenticity shifts the question of identity from society to the individual person. Within the cult of authenticity, the production of self becomes a permanent activity. You must permanently do the work and pursue the project of producing yourself. Authenticity thus atomizes society. It puts you on your own path and romanticizes that for you. So by people saying to you, go find your true self and live your true purpose, That is a form of atomizing society. I think that's such an interesting idea. Another quote from this book that I love, it's called The Compulsion of Authenticity is the chapter's name. The society of authenticity is a performance society. So whenever you have a society that privileges authenticity, you will have people performing themselves. All members perform themselves. All produce themselves. How will this make me seem if I post this? I don't want to seem like this. What caption should I add to make it look like this? How do I not seem this but seem that? Producing the self, producing the self, producing the self. What do? I produce myself. I tell the story that I want you to hear, not necessarily the fullest story. Everyone, I'm of course including myself in this. Am I not producing myself by what gets edited out of this video? The fact that this video is being made at all. But anyways, everybody pays homage to the cult of the self. What are you doing to actualize yourself? What are you doing to improve yourself? Who are you? The worship of self in which everyone is his or her own priest. And I think we see this in main character syndrome as a little vignette of culture and this idea that you should live your life as though you are the main character. This is why he said the cult of authenticity atomizes society. If you have 100 people and you have the desire to have a very socially cohesive, communal, collectivist society, would you rather have 100 people who all believe that they are the main character and that their highest purpose on this earth is to be their most authentic self? Or would you rather have people who don't think authenticity is the most important value, who have a relational understanding of self, that yes, I'm not the same person I am with my parents and family as I am with these people who I'm building this woodwork with, as I am with the rivers, as I am with the trees, because each social role that I'm in actually asks different things of me. When I'm in the role of teacher, that's a different thing that's being asked of me socially than when I'm in the role of worshiper. I'm not authentic. In fact, my authenticity is not the point of my life. What does it mean to privilege the idea of being authentic and the work that it takes to upkeep the image of authenticity? So what I think is really important on this topic of social comparison and how this all weaves together is the truth is we aren't, well, a truth. I can't say the truth. I don't have any sort of monopoly on the truth. My truth at this moment that I want to express is that we didn't come here to be on our own path. I really think we came here to be with each other, and that this kind of advice in response to comparison, it is silencing the wisdom that maybe comparison feels so terrible because we weren't set up to have such huge inequality between us and the people around us. We were set up for sharing. We weren't set up for toxic beauty standards. We weren't, like, that's not in our bodies' desires or needs to have this painful beauty hierarchy. So we were not set up to live this kind of life. I want to read another quote from Gabor Mate's book, The Myth of Normal. All stresses represent the absence or threatened loss of something an organism perceives as necessary for survival. And so I wonder, when we're feeling this stressor of like, I'm not good enough, I'm not where I'm meant to be in my career, I'm not where I'm meant to be in my relationship life, I'm this age and I haven't done this thing, I'm not beautiful enough and that makes me deeply unworthy. When we have this messaging and we feel like, oh my goodness, this pain, this stressor of not feeling enough, not feeling worthy, to the point of feeling we don't deserve to be here, to the point that we feel this self-annihilation. That stressor represents the absence or the threatened loss of something we perceive as necessary for our survival. And I think that thing we perceive as necessary for our survival is a society of cohesion, of unity, of like we are together, and also recognizing the inherent divinity of all beings. Because when you don't have that spiritual foundation of a society, you will always have suffering. When someone has to prove their worth rather than that just be a given, whether that's the being, the human, or the river, or the skies, the air, when that inherent divinity, that inherent worthiness, whatever word you want to use, it indicates a culture where that inherent value is not cherished. From that, suffering ensues. Suffering will be inflicted. When we're made to live in a competitive society, even if we don't want to compete, you're made to compete in the market society. And when we live in a society that's telling us, oh, you have to buy your way into worthiness, oh, you can't afford to do that, oh, shame. then of course we are going to feel like that need to live in a culture that doesn't ask us to be anything than what we are. That's a deep pain. So Gabor continues, an impending loss of food supply, for example, is a major stressor for any creature. So is, for our species, the absence or threatened loss of love, work, dignity, self-esteem, or meaning. So I just want to highlight that there are so many social structures, capitalism and the mass inequality that has continued to grow, consumerism, pervasive inequality, white supremacy, the forms of supremacy that exist among marginalized groups, and the beauty standards that exist across the board, the colorism, the ableism, the anti-fatness, how social media platforms work and their business models and how that does not further our collective well-being. All these social structures make comparison almost inevitable in my mind. So for me, it's not comparison is the thief of joy, i.e. comparison leads to suffering. It's all these social structures lead to suffering in and of themselves, but also lead to, as an intermediary, that comparison, which then leads to suffering. So it's social structures leading to comparison, leading to suffering, and also it's the social structures directly leading to suffering, not only through comparison, because that's a very specific and limited form of suffering under this broader system. So when we have unforgivable beauty standards, when we have culture constantly shoving images down our throats, making us not feel worthy, I think what is removed when we say comparison is the thief of joy, and just don't compare yourself to them. You're not them. No two flowers are the same. I think there is a deep pain that can sometimes be erased even as we try to be responsive to this pain. At this stage, I'm sure you're wondering, okay, so what do we do about this? And of course, an episode, a soul session is not going to solve social comparison, nor is it even intending to. It's just aiming to give language that can be more rooted in a collective understanding so that when we do feel comparison, we feel less, first of all, shame around it, because shame indicates we shouldn't feel this way. I should feel happy for her. I shouldn't feel unworthy. And it's like when we talk about it from a social lens, it coheres, it makes sense with the society we live in, which can hopefully help to reduce some of that shame. Like, yes, I should feel this way, in the sense this is a natural extension. This feeling is a natural extension of the culture that I live in. Even if it makes me feel like I'm a bad person, that's also an extension of the culture that I live in and the imagination that shapes that culture. So what I have sort of come to is, because it's our culture, our society, that leads to this feeling of comparison, a framework we could think of where an individual recognizes their suffering but doesn't blame themselves for it could be this idea of a cultural cold or a cultural flu. When you get the flu, you're not like, what's wrong with me? I have the flu and I'm so unworthy, and what have I done? And it's so shameful that I have the flu. You recognize that that is a symptom of being part of a society, of sharing the earth with other beings, and also of maybe the weather. I think that's maybe been debunked, but we'll just go with it for metaphorical and poetic reasons. The conditions of the earth and the weather, the people and the bacteria and the viruses that are growing and living among us, and how easily they spread, and the fact that we share resources and we share infrastructure. That means I therefore now have a flu, and I'm not to blame, and there's a certain way I should treat myself with care and with acknowledgement when I do have the flu. I shouldn't say, oh no, you don't have the flu. You can't have the flu. You're not the kind of person who gets the flu. You're like, no, I'm a person. Of course I get sick. And of course my body is doing what it can to try and fight the sickness. And also I'm worthy of this rest, even though many of us don't actually feel that way. So I think comparison is similar, because even though we sort of have this current of it flowing through all experiences, there are those moments where it's like a flare up. I just had breakfast with a friend, or I saw my high school peer group, or I went on social media and was in this rabbit hole of just looking at people who are traveling in ways that I can't afford to travel, or all these things. You could say to yourself, okay, I have a cultural cold. I have a cultural flu of comparison. And that doesn't make me unworthy. That doesn't make me shameful. That makes me part of a society. That makes me part of a culture that is toxic. Like, this is a toxic culture, and I have a bout of the effects of that toxicity. The second reason I like this idea of like a cultural cold or cultural flu is it also calls on us to be really truthful and loving in what we are doing to spread this flu and spread this cultural cold. So thinking to ourselves, if I'm taking a picture of this moment and trying to post it on my Instagram, why am I doing that? Like, what is my intention? Do I actually want people to envy me? Because that's what's also happening. A lot of people, we fuel each other. We feel the envy, we feel the jealousy. And so we say, okay, cool, I'm going to try and do something that fills this void by in turn perpetuating it. You know what I mean? And so I think a lot of the content that makes us feel really shitty on Instagram, I know that I used to post like this in my early 20s, where it was like, oh, I need to show off myself because I don't feel worthy and I feel insecure in my own way. So I'm just going to make other people feel that way. I didn't think of it in that way, but now looking back, it's like I wanted people to envy me. You know, I wanted people to look at me and be like, oh, look at her, she's fashionable or whatever. And I think it's like, if you are in a beautiful moment, where's the impulse to share it on your profile? Where does it even come from? Just thinking of that can be interesting. The ways it's normalized that we post in ways that make us also feel not good enough. So we perpetuate this cultural cold online. And then offline, I think in our relationships, what this looks like is not sharing the highlight reel of our lives, on and offline actually. How can we be more truthful so that if you're in a new relationship and it seems perfect and your friend is envious of it, if it is really perfect and you have nothing to share, I'm not saying make things up, but if you are kind of putting that perfect face forward and saying, oh, it's perfect, it's wonderful, of course that's going to engender a sense of envy. But if you say, you know, I started this new job, I got promoted, in these ways, I'm loving it. It's more of the work that I wanted to do. I'm working with a really great team. And also sometimes I miss having a little bit more time to myself. Then it's easier for your friend to walk away from that and be like, okay, I'm really happy for her. And also I understand that there are things to not envy about this experience. I think that's just so much easier to sit with. But I'm not saying I have to make sure you don't feel jealous of me, so I'm going to downplay myself. I'm saying I have to be truthful. And if I say to you, I love this and I love that and I love that and this is amazing and this is amazing and this is amazing, you're going to walk away like, oh my goodness. But that's also not true. It'd be different if that was true. I'm like, yes, these things about this path are amazing. These parts about the path I don't like. I think that's just so much more loving. Give someone the full picture. And in moments where you recognize you're actually obfuscating the fullness of your truth, that is going to grow the cultural cold of comparison. Okay? We've all felt that sigh of relief where we thought something was perfect and then we sat down with someone and we're like, so this thing that I was fearing regret of also has its flaws, because every path you choose in this life has its flaws. The person who seems like they're in the perfect relationship is sacrificing something to be in that relationship. The person who seems like they have the perfect job, there are moments of their life where they think, what the fuck am I doing? Like, that's part of the human experience. But when some people pretend like, oh, this path has insulated me from suffering, I don't suffer on this path, this path is amazing, I think it does naturally grow our envy, because we know on a spiritual level nothing is so simple as to be perfect, as to be only good. You know, everything has its both and maybe that person was willing to put up with certain things that you wouldn't put up with, you know. And I think that's really important. For me, that's really helped with relationships. Relationship envy, I don't really have it as much anymore. I see the fullness of the relationship and I'm like, okay, there are aspects of this that are enviable, but there's also aspects of my single life that are enviable. That's a third way that we can sit with this, is if I envy people, then there may be people who envy me. Maybe I have an amazing friend group. Maybe I'm an artist. Maybe I'm an amazing chef. There's people who are like, damn, I wish I could cook like her. So we could also ask ourselves, okay, in what ways do people maybe envy me? I do know though that these are all individual responses to collective issues, which is where we started out. So I think that the way to solve this cultural cold is to change the conditions that brewed the virus or bacteria in the first place, to change the social structures and to reimagine a society more in alignment with love and collective thriving, mutual aid. Like, there's enough to go around and it shouldn't be structured in a way that is so deeply unequal. So I think that's a deeply important thing, that we can't be well unless the social system that shapes us and that we also shape is well. If that system is unwell, we will be unwell. And if the way that we're taught to think of ourselves within the context of that system is individualistic, then we will also be unwell. I hope that this soul session has served you. I hope that it's helped you. I hope that it's offered you something that maybe you were craving or needed, or just maybe in the future will reach for. And if you're feeling like you're not good enough, it is my hope that this offered you something nourishing. I was feeling a lot of blocks with respect to this topic. I have an essay on this that you can read on my newsletter. This is also like my 5th time trying to record this video, so I just felt like blocked by it, and I'm proud of myself for hitting send. If you're seeing this, it means I not only finished recording it but edited and shared it with you. So thank you for being here. Thank you for reaching for my voice. I will continue to reach for your heart, for your highest good, for your love. I'm so grateful to be on this shared journey, this shared path. Everything I create is an attempt to reach for you. It's an attempt to find flowers that I find meaningful and gather them into a bouquet and say like, hey, do you like these flowers? Did they help you? Do you want more of them? So I just appreciate you so much for being here and for experiencing me and for receiving me and seeing me and holding me with so much love. I love all the comments. I read them. I love them, whether they be on YouTube or Spotify or wherever you listen. I'm grateful. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. And I will see you next time you step into the soul salon. Carry the frequency, carry the vibration. And I love you so, so much. I will see you on the next soul session. I love you. Bye. I hope some paradigms have been shifted for you in today's conversation. As always, if you can, please leave a 5-star rating on Apple and Spotify. Like, comment, subscribe. I love you so, so much. Okay? I love you. Join me on my Substack. Links in the comment section. Go there. Okay? Love you so much. Love you. Bye.